All right, thank you, Carter. And again, I am David. Now, we've heard from Charna, Roy, and Rin all about the various pieces of OpenRAG. And what I really want to dig into now is what happens when you want to expand on some of those pieces and maybe do some things that aren't directly in the OpenRAG UI. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Langflow, Langflow is it's a Visual Studio for developers. It's used to build agentic generative AI and RAG workflows in a low-code, no-code fashion. But there is depth for developers, and I'm going to show you a bit of that as we move forward. So why don't we go ahead and get into it? All right, so if you remember before, when Charna was showing the OpenRAG UI, I've got pretty much the same setup here. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to start having a conversation. If we take a look at the knowledge I have, though, I have some Wikipedia documents that I've ingested over a URL. I've got some stuff about the Flow podcast that we run, and some other general documents. But in this particular case, what I'm after is I'm building an application. And in fact, I'm building a D&D auto battler, like a retro D&D auto battler. So I'm going to use OpenRAG to actually help me in that process. So first thing I want to do, though, is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to say, what D&D monsters are in the latest manual? Now, here's the thing. I have not actually ingested any data about D&D into my OpenRAG system. So if you notice the response I get here, there's no relevant supporting sources were found for that request. So now this is where, if you can imagine, maybe I have data disparate systems. I have data around my organization or data in different areas that may not be data that I can readily ingest. So how can I expand what I'm doing in OpenRAG to now add that data in and do it right now? So what I'm going to do is here in OpenRAG, I'm just going to go to my settings. Now, Charlie was showing a little bit of this earlier, but I'm going to do something a little bit different. So you notice that both for the agent here and for the knowledge ingest, you have these edit and Langflow buttons. I'm just going to click on this one for the agent. I'm going to open that up. And now I'm going into this flow. Now, real quick, before I do the fun part here, I do want to kind of explain what it is that we're seeing. I did mention that Langflow is a visual ID that allows you to drag and drop components in. You're going to see me do some of that. It also has support for dozens of model providers. So where I'm using OpenAI in this case, Trina was using Anthropic earlier. There are literally dozens and dozens of providers with possibly thousands of models in them that you can easily drag and drop, and you can actually drop into one of these flows. It's the same thing for vector stores and other data sources, right? And you do that here on the left-hand menu. You see I've got all these types of things. I'm going to bring something over here in a moment. Now, if you look at the flow itself, what's going on here? The key thing really is this agent, and the agent is our brains, right? And notice that I'm tied into that same OpenSearch data. So again, this is the flow that is powering that chat experience when you're in OpenRAG itself. But remember a moment ago, I asked a question about those D&D monsters, and it wasn't able to give me an answer because I don't have that data in my system. So let's imagine now I have data in an external data source. I'm going to bring over my D&D store. So in this case, I actually have a vector store that I've got some data in. And I'll zoom into that so you can see a little bit more. And now all I'm going to do is wire this right up, okay? And if you take a look here, you'll see I have this information about the action itself. I have a slug, this D&D monsters. I've also given it a description. This is super important, by the way. Why? Because your agent needs to know what is this data for? What is this about, right? And so by giving it a good unique slug and description, you're giving the information to the agent that it needs. Now, I mentioned that this is the flow that's powering OpenRAG. So let's go back over here. I'm going to go back to OpenRAG, go back to my chat, and I'm going to say, do that again. And we see our little dog wagging its tail. And it's going to go fetch stuff, right? It's fetching data. Boom, check this out. Notice now how you see this function call, this D&D monsters function call here, right? Where did it get that from? Well, remember, I mentioned that slug a moment ago. So our agent, our OpenRAG set up this agent, was able to determine, based off of the question I asked, what the actual monsters were and what the correct tool was. So now I was able to take external data that was not actually something I ingested directly into OpenRAG, and I was able to very easily add it right into my flow, and now I have that information useful for me. Now, okay, so I mentioned before, that I was building a D&D app, right? And so why don't we go ahead and take a look a little bit more at what's going on there. I should also add, separate to things like just bringing in, like I did a vector store, Langflow itself actually has native support for MCP, right? Roy was mentioning MCP earlier. And why is this important? Well, for a couple different reasons. For one, now with MCP, the ecosystem of the various types of tools that I have available has significantly broadened, right? But then because of this native support in Langflow, it means that I can do something like this. Let's say I have other sources. So if I pop out of this project real quick and I look over here, I actually have a set of custom RAG flows. These are other RAG data that I've actually pulled in from other systems. These are all just kind of like other basic agents, right? One is talking to like LinkedIn job listings data. I have one that I ingested in a Riley book. And again, just looking at cases where I have external pieces of data. And because of the MCP support, I can literally just bring these in, pop this in the tool mode, and I'm going to say, you know something, I've already got the D&D stuff. I just want these two. Great. And now I can also wire that right up. And it would be the same thing too if I wanted to add, say, like a URL component, all sorts of things, any kind of MCP component. I can do this kind of stuff. So I can continuously expand, if I want to, the types of things that my OpenRAG agent is doing. Okay. All right, so I mentioned this D&D app. So one of the things I'd like to do is we're going to go ahead and take a look at, just a very basic chat app I've built. So OpenRAG itself, the UI, is just built. It's a JavaScript app. It's built using the calls through Langflow, the OpenAI responses API, and things like that for good streaming. That's how you get these nice streaming interactions. But then as a developer, I want to do something like this myself, right? And so in this case, I've got this like basic Next.js app. You could see up here, I could easily create, something kind of similar to what Rin did earlier. Whip this up in probably like maybe an hour, right? That is essentially going through Langflow and it is interacting here. So if I then say, give me a table of the D&D monsters and compare them. See. You see it's ragging there. There we go. Right, so I'm getting this, and again, this is coming from that recent data that I just added into my OpenRAG system. So this makes it easily extensible. But I mentioned a moment ago being able to then use this in application development. So yeah, having the chatbot is pretty cool, but we can do more, right? So I'm gonna open up a little Easter egg here, and like I said, I'm making this retro D&D auto battler, right? And for those of you who aren't familiar with D&D, the lore is extensive, and there are an absolute ton of various classes and monsters and things like that. They have all sorts of stats and everything that go along with them. And from an application development standpoint, I'm looking for how can I leverage OpenRAG to speed up my development and make it so I don't make like simple mistakes on, say, the types of abilities maybe a cleric has or something like that. So if you take a look here, you'll notice that I have these buttons up top, this load classes from OpenRAG and load monsters from OpenRAG. So it's able to use these searches, kind of like what Rin was showing in Charna and stuff earlier, against this now compendium of knowledge I have to then auto-generate all of the character classes and the monster classes based off of the information that it finds. And it's allowed me now as a developer, if I pop one of these open here, let's see, I go to the monsters, take the dragon. Now as a wizard, yeah, there we go. And I'll say, so now I've got these two characters here, and like the stats here, all this kind of stuff. This is actually coming from real queries into OpenRAG that allow me to develop with it. Now let's take this a step further. It's one thing to be able to pull from the data and like generate something like this dynamically, but what about when I'm coding? Well, if you remember before, I mentioned that Langflow has native dockling, or native dockling support is native in Langflow, but native MCP support. So if I go to the MCP server tab here for any of my projects in Langflow, I have this ability to expose out my flows via MCP. And why is this important? Well, here I have these various tools. I can say, hey, I want the OpenRAG search agent, maybe the URL ingestion flow. And now I can come into something like Cursor or Claude Code or Warp or whatever, and I can configure it, right? I can come down in here and I can say, hey, I want you to talk to this thing. And you'll notice that whether I use the auto install or if I just take the JSON here, I can just literally put this in my config and then I'll point it right to my Langflow instance, these particular flows. And now I've exposed OpenRAG to my cursor agent. And where this comes into play, where this is actually coming into play with this very app, is now I can ask it questions. So as I'm working through my development and I am trying to figure out something maybe about dragons or something like that, and I want to maybe check something that's in my code, not only can I get information about it in real time, I can actually use that to build out some of the structures that are in my code with vibe coding, right? So it now means that I can leverage this OpenRAG knowledge directly into my downstream agents when I'm coding to help out my application development. And with that, I'll leave you with QR code for Langflow. So if you want to check out more, then just go ahead and scan that or bring it to langflow.org. And again, I cannot wait to see what everyone builds with OpenRAG.